Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Uncaught Exception mini sessions. We are now at episode 23, and in this episode, I will be sharing about Vue Js version 3 and Vite. So let's just get right into it. Um, so let's start with okay, we know Vue. It's the progressive JavaScript framework that we've probably used before. V3 is just the same Vue.js with additional new features that are really cool. So let's take a look at Vite. Vite is another front-end tooling for JavaScript. So similar usage with like Webpack or Rollup or Parcel, whatever you've used before. Um, you can use Vite in those places. So again, this is their page, vitejs.dev. Um, some nice features like the server start, fast hot module replacement, which are it's really fast. So let's just create a random app with Vue.js V3 and Vite and see what are some new things, and let's see if we like them. So okay, how to get started? We can check the Vue.js docs. Um, so before we start, Vue.js V3, you don't have to use Vite with it. You can use like Vue CLI and other tools, but in this case, we'll just use Vite. So we can initialize an app, a Vue.js app using Vite. So let's try running this. Um, okay, proceed. So it asks us for a project name. So project. And Vite is a front-end tool that's framework agnostic, which means it's not necessarily tied into Vue, and you don't have to use it only with Vue.js, but you can use it also with other front-end frameworks like React or Preact or Little Elements, or even without any frameworks, just with vanilla JS. So in our case, we'll use Vue, and our project is initialized. So here it is. I'll actually use another one that I created earlier since I made some changes for demo purposes. So you can run a bit up. Let's take a look at the code that it generated. Uh, yeah, pretty straightforward. We have a source folder. We have packet.json. Let's inspect this first. So here we are already using Vue3 and we are using Vite. So using the beta version, so it's fine. And also, before, if you've used Vue.js 2, if you use single file components, you have to install like Vue template compiler, right? So with V3, it's a different compiler already. It's called Vue compiler SFC. And just make sure if you're setting this up manually, make sure that the compiler SFC version is the same as the Vue version, so it works well. And since we are using Vite for Vue, we need the Vite Vue.js plugin also. So that's it. It gives us some scripts that we can run. So let's try running our app. And here's the random or sample app. So here we have the default demos everywhere, which is like a counter. So that's nice. It works. So let's take like a look at our project again. So that's package.json. That's the dependencies that we need. Then here we have the Vite config. So it's very simple. It's if you've configured Webpack, this is so much simpler than that. And by default, it has a default config, and the only thing we need to change for now is to add the Vue.js plugin. So it works with Vue.js apps. But of course, Vite supports additional configuration in case we need it in our app. So we can just check those in the docs. For example, if we change our root directory, then we change it here. If we change the URL where our app is served in production, then that's the base. So this is equivalent to like Webpack's public path, I think, and other configs. So you can also add aliases here if you need them. So, but we'll leave it using the default for now. One thing about Vite is that it's so fast because under the hood, it's using ES build, which is a JavaScript bundler that's written in Go. So it's apparently very fast. And yes, I've tried Vite several times before, and it's really, really fast. At least with the apps that I've built, which are not really super big apps. But let's see. So that's Vite. Um, yes. So our entry point for our app is index.html, which I think I like it this way, having an HTML file as the entry point as compared to like with Webpack where you have a JavaScript file and then you use the HTML Webpack plugin to inject JS to the HTML. It's very like roundabout for me, so I like it this way. And but that's just me. You can disagree with me. So yes, so here's our HTML file, and we are loading our Vue apps entry point script, which we'll take a look now. So HTML file, just really nothing here for now. So yes, before we look at this, that's pretty much about what we'll talk about. Vite config's very straightforward. It's very fast, as we will see in a bit. So now we will go into the Vue V3 features. And right from the entry point or like the top level script, we see the differences already. So with V3, we now have to create our app using the create app like function instead of using new.view. So instead of using new.view, so it's different now. You have to use create app, but everything else the same. So we pass our top level component, we mount it to a DOM element which we have in our index.html. So that's it. Let's take a look at our Vue components this time. And the script part itself, I mean the component definition, it still works. I mean the Vue2 syntax still works. It's not like they completely unsupported everything. So if you're whatever you're used with, whatever you're used to with Vue2, you can still do them in V3. Except, I mean, there are some APIs that were removed, so just be careful with those. But for the most part, it's pretty much the same. So here we're importing our component, and we define them in our components option. You can define props, you can define data, stuff like that. So it's the same. You can define like lifecycle methods. So still the same. But in this file, we'll probably notice like one difference in V3 that's not in V2, which is our single file components now supports multiple like root level nodes, root elements. So before with V2, this won't work. We'd have to like wrap them with a div, for example, because in V2 you can only have one root element. That in V3 you can now do this. So VueJS V3 actually calls this feature fragments, which I know the name is taken from another network. I mean another framework, I think. So, but it's fine. Um, okay, before we go further into the code, this here's the Vue.js V3 page that summarizes all the changes from V2 to V3. So you can check out everything that's new or everything that's removed. So here are the most notable features, which are something that's really not in V2 before. So composition API will sort of like React hooks, teleport. Let's just not click the link, but okay, never. Let's just click link. So it allows us to like render a component inside another DOM element outside of the our root DOM element. Fragments. This is what we just saw, supporting multiple root elements in our component. So emits, we'll say that later. This other stuff I'm not familiar with. And suspense allows us to um, asynchronously load another component and display a fallback while that's still loading. So some of these APIs or features are, I think, inspired by other frameworks out there. So let's just go back to our code. So this is the fragments part. We can now support multiple root level elements. And let's see. Here we are importing a component from components. Hello world. We see here again, we're using multiple root elements. That's nice. And this is here we see our first look at the composition API, kinda. So instead of we can now define like reactive properties or state using reactive functions instead of defining them in data. So, and that is so because of the new setup functions in our components. So before, this would usually look like this. Oops. Like state equals count 0. And if you want a function that updates the count, you'd have to put them all inside a methods property, right? And we also have like computed. If you have values that are derived from other values, you can have watch. If you want to observe changes to a certain value. So thing with this is that they're all segregated by type. So all methods will be here, all computed properties will be here. So using the composition API and the setup function, we can now group related like functionalities together. So we can define, for example, if we have a method that updates state, we can define it just near the code that defines the state. So we can have update state, for example, and then it's going to be a function, and then return it here, update state. Okay. So what is this doing? Reactive, and also there's a similar method that's called ref. It allows us to create reactive values. Reactive values means they can be used in like the template up here, for example, and whenever their value changes, the state or like the template or wherever they are used also updates. So either ref or reactive. So they're pretty much the same, although I think ref is used for primitive values like strings, numbers, etc. And you would use reactive for like objects or arrays. And I personally just use ref all the time because I saw somewhere in the docs that under the hood, if you pass an object or array, ref will just call reactive. So just saves me some confusion. So I'll just keep it like that. Let's see if that still works. Refresh. Oh, I shouldn't have refreshed. It should just hot mode should reload. So it still works. Okay. So this is the setup scripts. And we don't really have to define like computed or watch or methods anymore. We can do them directly inside the setup function. So for example, we want to have a computed property. So we can just do that by importing computed from Vue. And let's just call it double count, which will be a computed property that doubles the count. So state that value. Oh, if you're using ref to reference the actual value that it represents, you have to call like the dot value property inside your setup function. But if you use it in the template, you don't have to put that value. So might be confusing at first for me, but you'll get used to it. And that count times 2. Oops. Count. And you have to return it. So any variable that's defined within the setup function, if you want them to be accessed or used in the template, you have to return them. So double count. Let's try putting it after the button. So double count. So hit double count is here. So it's working. And we didn't define a separate computed like option here. We just use the computed function from Vue. So this is composition API. Again, we can use watch. So watch if you want to observe a value. So let's say every time double count changes, we log its value. So we can just say watch double count. And this will be the function that will be executed every time the value changes. So let's see, console.log.value. And oh, I keep refreshing. So here, the value is being logged. That's nice. We can watch multiple items by just passing an array. The values that we watch here, they need to be reactive values. So double count is reactive. We can also watch state because it's reactive. However, if we want to observe like non-reactive values, we can pass a function that will return the value or whatever non-reactive value we want. So, but we just keep it that way. That passing a function here is usually useful when you want to watch props. So let's say props.msg or something. Okay, just watch double count. So those are some changes. The setup function, the composition API, which allows us to define reactive values, computed properties, and watchers directly in the setup function. Oh, what else do I have here? Yes, lifecycle methods. So normally, lifecycle methods just have a function here like mounted or destroyed, so I think. So we can also just define it inside the setup function because we can just import the unmounted function. So let's call it. So we pass in the function that we want to run whenever this component gets mounted. So console.log mounted. See, so as you can see, log mounted. Let's try refreshing. So here it log mounted. That's cool. What else? What's next? So we won't be, I won't be able to go through every single change here. Oh, where's that page? But we'll just go through the common ones that I tend to use a lot in my projects. So what's next? What's next? What's next? Okay. There's actually another way of writing the setup function, and that's by using the setup script syntax. So it's if we like use setup like exclusively, like we all use the composition API methods and everything, so we'll have a lot of content inside our setup function, and everything else are just not important, I think. So one way to do this to like reduce the amount of code in our script is to just make the entire script the setup function, and that can be done by using the setup script or like passing the setup attribute in our script. That would mean that every piece of code inside this script tag is part of the setup function. So we can just um, cut everything here. So let's see. So we don't have to export anything anymore. So I'll just comment it out for reference. So how does this work? Okay, so in the setup function before, we have to return the variables or values that we want to be able to access and use in our template, right? But with the setup script, we don't have to do that anymore. Every value that's or every variable, every function and stuff like that that's defined within the setup script can be automatically used inside the template. So we don't have to return anything anymore. And props, we'll get to the props in a bit, but let's just refresh and see if it works. Refresh. Okay. We just get a warning. Yes, because it's the props, but everything still works. And our setup script is now like more concise. Next, let's deal with the props. So because we're not exporting an object anymore, how do we define our props? We can Vue.js actually imports a define props function. So we can just say props equals define props. And then we pass in here the object, which is our props, whatever object we usually pass in our props property. So just message string and others in the future as you add more props. So let's see. So message is now defined. Everything still works the same, but setup script is now shorter. So in my case, I like doing it this way, but just take note. This is currently marked as, where is that? Here. This is currently marked as an experimental feature. So just lock down your dependency versions so you don't accidentally break your app. But I like it this way. What else? Okay, so setup script. Let's try converting to setup script. This will actually just become like this. So no need to define components because hello world is already defined within the setup script scope. So we can readily use it in our template like so. So everything still works. That's nice. Okay. Few more things. um, events, some changes in events. Okay, let's restore this one for now. So before, let's just call mounted. We can just call emit, right? And what the event name, then some data. So now we can still do this, but we now have to list down all the event names that our component is expected to emit. So we have to define that this component will emit event name at some point. Otherwise, if we don't add this will still work, but it will be treated as a native event. So Vue.js, I think it's part of the removed like APIs, like the that native modifier in the v on or like the at something syntax. They remove the dot native, but you have to define a list of event names that our component emits so that they won't be treated as native. So yes, with like the regular options API, not using compositions API, this is how you do it. But with composition API, um, because we can't pass options objects, we can do emit, and Vue.js gives us the define emit function. So let's call it event name. Then we'll have to import it and see if it works. Okay, cool. And if you want to emit an event, we can just call emit event name. Let's see if this works. So at event name, okay, handle event. And where will I put this? Just put this on methods. Handle event. Hello. Okay, so here's our hello. So it works. So just make sure for custom events, you define it either in emits here if you're using the options API or this object. And for composition API, using define emit. Okay, let's just leave it like that. What's next? Yes, some just last two things on my list. One thing is that we now like V3 now supports multiple V model um, bindings or values. So V model, if you're not familiar, it allows Vue.js to have like two-way data binding between like a value and a component or element where it's passed to. So now, so normally it looks like this. What do I call this? Let's call it value. And so we're not using composition API here, so let's just pass data. Oops. Value string. And yes, it looks like this. So in V2, in order to use V model on custom elements, we used to have like a value prop, which would let's say a string, and then to in order to send back a value to the parent component, we have to emit input, right, with a new value. So the idea is still the same in V3, but there are some changes. So the value is now called model value, and the event is now called model value. But yeah, this is a custom event, so make sure we define it in our emit list. Some the value, see if that works. how do I see if it works? Yes, let's just not run it, but it took something like that. However, we can pass multiple view models, so we can have um, multiple like two-way data bindings. So we can actually say, let's say view model, and then pass it a parameter like message, and then which value we want to bind it to. So message. And in our component, just have to receive message, which would be a string, and update message. Is it update message? Yes. So that's how it works. So otherwise, if we don't use like this v model syntax, we can just break it down into the longer version, which is update message. So handle something, but v model looks nicer and shorter, so I like doing that. Yes. And one last thing, which I think is really helpful for development, is well, before I say it, let's just define some example data. So for example, items, and 1, 2, 3, and then let's just render them here as li. Okay, I don't have keys for them, so I'll just use the index. And let's try. Oh no, I didn't pass the key. Okay, what's wrong? Value is not defined. Why is value not defined in hello world? Okay, yeah, this one. Okay, let's see. So we have 1, 2, 3. Let's add a button that adds an item. So button add click add methods. So item. So here's the thing. So before we would usually do something like this, right? Because in JavaScript, arrays, objects, they are passed by reference. So if you want items here to like reactively update, we have to assign a new array object. So we usually do this that items and then the new item that we want. It still works. Oops, this still works. However, in V3, mutations on arrays and objects are already reactive, so we can just say this that push, items that push, and it will still work, which is really cool. So no need to create new arrays or like create new objects. For example, if you have persons, create person, so a name, and then no need to do something like this that person equals this person name equals a new name. So we can just do person that name equals new name. So easier to read, I think. So that will just work because Vue3 now uses JavaScript proxies in order for reactivity to work. So proxies are, yeah, it's another JavaScript API, but it's really powerful for like controlling like access to certain objects. So this will work, and this will trigger reactive changes wherever that person is used. So that's okay. because I like composition API, let's convert this to composition API before we end. So no need to define that. Emits. So we import define emit from Vue, and emit equals define emit, which where we list our expected event names that our component are expected to emit. So data, these are reactive values, so we can define them with ref. And I like putting define emit first. So ref, so we can have value equals ref, and then the initial value. Message should be ref and initial value. Items is ref 1, 2, 3. Again, um, for arrays and objects or like more complex values, we can use reactive also, but ref should be all right. And finally, person equals ref. So no need for these. And methods. Oops, typo. Just define a handle event method where we console the log hello. So no need for this. And finally, an add method where just put this. So we can get rid of this entire exported object. So I'm still currently grouping them, oops, by like type, but definitely don't have to. For example, here we are updating items. So let's just remove this. So updating items. So we can just put them like next to each other, so it's easier to spot like where the changes, I mean, which values the function is going to change. So also, you can extract this into a separate, as this component grows, we'll have a lot of code inside the script. So that could be like harder to maintain. So we can extract it into like a new file that exports this. They will remain reactive and we can still use them normally like we currently do here. So that's it. One last thing, let's build our app. So here's our app is built. It's in this by default but Vite can be configured to put it somewhere else. And some last things. So again, it's really helpful to check this introduction to V3 page, which summarizes the changes from V2 to V3. So some breaking changes that you have to know about. Um, other minor changes that are maybe just deprecations, and some removed APIs like this. On, off, and ones are now removed, so can't use them anymore. And okay, my laptop is dying. And final things, if you're building Vue apps, will most likely use a router or a state management library. So in Vue, that would be by default Vue router. Um, the latest version, I'm not sure if compatible with V3, maybe a little, but check in the versions, and the next tag for Vue router is what's compatible with V3 for sure. So there's some changes. Check the docs. I mean, yeah, there's some changes. For example, defining our router now looks something like, can't find it. Something like this. So we now call like the create router, similar to like the create app for Vue. So some other option changes. So just read the changes. Same with Vuex. The current latest version is not the one for V3, but if you check out V4, that's the one that works with Vue Js V3. So let's look at the docs again. So we now create store like this. You can find it. Yeah, so we're not gonna use create store instead of using like new Vue exit store. But everything else pretty much the same in terms of API. And that's it. There's still a lot of changes um, that are in V3. So just check them out from their docs. And they also provide a guide on how to, for example, if we take a look at this, so it shows you what it looks like in V2, what it looks like in V3, and then they give us a guide on how to migrate from V2 to V3. So that's hopefully makes our lives easier. And for now, that's it. Um, these are just like what I've experienced with V3 and Vite so far. But if it's interesting for you, definitely try it in your own apps and see the differences for yourselves. But for now, I guess we'll end it here. And just please subscribe to the channel for more live streams and updates, or wherever you're watching this. And we do a live stream every Saturday 9 p.m. So see you next time. Bye bye.